He promised to buy my airline just to fire me. He just didn't know I was the owner. The pre-flight checks were routine, a familiar ballet of switches, gauges, and lights. Outside the cockpit window of the Embraer 175, the Denver sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the Rockies in hues of orange and purple. It was the last leg of the day, a short hop to Aspen. Easy. My co-pilot, Mark, a good kid barely 25, was running through the checklist with the practice monotone of a seasoned pro. For me, these moments were the best part of the job. The quiet hum of the auxiliary power unit, the sense of potential energy coiled in the wings, the world reduced to this small, focused space. It's why I started Starlight Air in the first place, not to sit in a boardroom staring at spreadsheets, but to be up here, in the captain's seat. Just as we were about to call the tower to push back, the gate agent's voice crackled through the headset. Starlight 482, this is Sarah at the gate. We've got a late passenger, a Mr. Henderson. He's just cleared security. He's insistent. I sighed, clicking the mic. How insistent, Sarah? There was a pause, and I could hear muffled shouting in the background. He's threatening to call his lawyer because the TSA line was too long. Says he's a platinum-tier flyer, and that we're contractually obligated to wait for him. Mark rolled his eyes. I'd seen it 1,000 times. The self-proclaimed kings of the sky, who think their ticket purchase includes a clause to bend time and space to their will. Starlight Air didn't even have a platinum tier. We were a small, regional airline focused on service, not sucking up to egos. We're already 5 minutes past our scheduled departure, Sarah, I said, looking at the clock. Every minute we sat here burned fuel and risked a domino effect of delays down the line. I know, Captain. He's making a scene, screaming at my staff. The shouting in the background got louder, more distinct. I could make out the words incompetent and lawsuit. I'm generally a by-the-book guy. The doors are closed, we go. But I also built my airline on the idea that we treat people with a bit of grace. Maybe the guy was having a truly terrible day. All right, Sarah. 5 more minutes, not a second more. If he's not on board by then, we're gone. Let him know the captain is doing him a personal favor. Will do, Captain. Thank you. Exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds later, Mr. Henderson stomped down the jet bridge. I could see him on the small CCTV monitor we have for the cabin door. He was a man in his late 50s wearing an expensive-looking suit that was rumpled from what was probably a very aggressive sprint through the terminal. His face was a mask of crimson fury, and he practically threw his briefcase at Clara, our lead flight attendant, as he boarded. "About time," he barked, not even making eye contact with her. "This is the most unprofessional, pathetic excuse for an airline I've ever seen. Is this a real plane or a toy? I pay for first class, not a glorified bus." Clara, a consummate professional, just smiled serenely. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I take your coat?" He scoffed, shrugging out of his jacket and thrusting it at her. "Just get me a scotch. Double. And I want to speak to the pilot. Now." My ears perked up. That was an unusual request. Through the still open cockpit door, I could hear Clara's calm reply. "I'm sorry, sir, but federal regulations prohibit passengers from entering the flight deck." "I don't want to enter it, you simpleton," he snapped, his voice loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "I want him to come out here. I need to have a word with him about the amateur hour you're running on the ground. People should be fired." I exchanged a look with Mark. This was escalating. I gestured for him to close and lock the cockpit door. The last thing we needed was this guy trying to force his way in. A moment later, the cabin phone buzzed. It was Clara. "Captain Evans, Mr. Henderson in 1A is demanding to speak with you. He's being very disruptive. Tell him I'll be happy to speak with him once we've landed safely in Aspen, Clara. Right now my focus is on flying the plane. I've tried that, Captain. He's not listening. He's threatening to get us all fired. He says he knows the board of directors." I almost chuckled. I was the board of directors. Me, my wife, and our golden retriever, Gus, who held an honorary, non-voting position. "Just do your best to calm him down, Clara. Offer him another drink. We're pushing back now." I keyed the mic to talk to the ground crew, but before I could speak, I heard a tremendous crash from the cabin, followed by a gasp. Then, Henderson's voice, now a full-throated roar that was perfectly audible even through the reinforced door. I am not going to be ignored. You tell that glorified cab driver up there to get his tail out here right now, or I'll own this entire rust bucket airline. I'll have his stripes, his wings, and his job. Do you hear me? You cowardly bastard in the cockpit? You're a dead man. You're finished." The entire cockpit went silent. The hum of the electronics seemed to fade away. Mark stared at me, his eyes wide. This had crossed a line. A dozen lines. This wasn't just a rude passenger anymore. This was a direct threat against the flight crew. This was a safety issue. The 70 other souls on this plane deserved to fly without a volatile, screaming man-child in the front row threatening the pilot. My hand, which had been reaching for the radio to call the tower, slowly changed course. A cold, calm certainty washed over me. He wanted to speak to the person in charge. He wanted to make threats to the person who could end his career. Fine. He was about to get his wish, just not in the way he imagined. I keyed the intercom, not for the cabin, but for the gate agent. My voice was low and steady. "Sarah, this is Captain Evans. Abort pushback. We're returning to the gate." A confused, "Copy that, Captain. Is there a mechanical issue?" came back. "No, Sarah," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "We have a passenger to deplane, and please have airport security meet us on the jet bridge. This gentleman seems to think he's important, and he's been cursing out the pilot. I think it's only right that the owner of the airline delivers the news of his lifetime ban personally." Mark stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "Captain? You're going out there?" He demanded to speak with the pilot who could get him fired. "Seems only fair to oblige," I said, unbuckling my harness. I took a deep, steadying breath. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about principle. It was about Clara, who shouldn't have to endure abuse just to do her job. It was about the other 70 passengers who deserved a safe and peaceful flight. It was about the brand and the culture I had spent a decade of my life building from a single leased plane into a respected regional carrier. "You have the controls, Mark. Keep the engines running. I don't intend for this to take long." I keyed the PA system, my voice echoing through the cabin, calm and measured. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the short delay. We are returning to the gate to resolve a security matter with a passenger. We expect to be underway again shortly and appreciate your patience." I saw Henderson in 1A through the CCTV. He sat back in his seat, a smug, triumphant smirk spreading across his face. He thought he'd won. He thought this public announcement was about him, a validation of his importance. He probably imagined I was returning to the gate so I could be properly reprimanded by a ground supervisor in front of him. The poor fool had no idea what was coming. The taxi back to the gate was the shortest of my career, but it felt agonizingly slow. The engines whined in reverse thrust as we nudged back into our parking spot. The familiar thump of the jet bridge connecting to the fuselage sounded like a gavel falling. The seatbelt sign chimed off. I stood up, adjusting my uniform jacket and straightening my tie. I ran a hand over my short, graying hair. I am not an imposing man, but I've been told that when I wear my 4-stripe epaulets, I carry a certain authority. I hoped it would be enough. I opened the cockpit door and stepped out. The cabin fell silent. Every eye was on me. Clara stood near the galley, her expression a mixture of apprehension and relief. I gave her a small, reassuring nod. Then I turned my attention to the man in seat 1A. Mr. Henderson looked up at me, his smirk widening into a sneer. "Well, well, well. Look what finally crawled out of the cockpit. Decided to face the music, did you? It's about damn time. Let me tell you something, son." "You must be Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting him off. I didn't move from the front of the aisle, creating a clear space between us. "You're damn right I am," he blustered, trying to regain the momentum I'd just taken from him. "And you are the so-called captain of this flying jalopy." "I am Captain Evans. Sir, your behavior on this aircraft has been unacceptable. You have verbally abused the cabin crew and made direct threats against the flight crew." He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "Unacceptable? I'll tell you what's unacceptable. Your third-rate ground crew, your ridiculous delays, and your flight attendants' attitude. I am a paying customer, a very important one, and I have a right to voice my displeasure. It's called customer service. You should look it up." Just then, as if on cue, two uniformed airport security officers appeared at the open cabin door. Their presence changed the atmosphere instantly. A few passengers gasped. Henderson's face, which had been smug, flushed with rage. "What is this?" he sputtered, pointing a shaking finger at the officers. "You called security on me. Are you insane? Do you have any idea who I am?" "I have a very good idea of who you are, Mr. Henderson," I said calmly. "You're the man who has single-handedly delayed the travel of 70 other people. You're the man who threatened a federal flight crew, and you are the man who is about to be removed from my aircraft." His jaw dropped. He seemed to swell with indignation, his face turning a shade of purple I had rarely seen on a human being. He rose from his seat, puffing out his chest to try and intimidate me, even though I was a good 6 inches taller. "You're removing me," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "You can't remove me. I'll have your job. I'll have your license. I'll sue you, this airline, and everyone associated with it into oblivion. I will buy this pathetic company for pennies on the dollar after I'm done with it, just so I can have the pleasure of firing you personally. Who in the hell do you think you are?" The question hung in the silent cabin. Every passenger was leaning forward, hanging on every word. The security officers stood impassively at the door, waiting for my signal. Mr. Henderson stood before me, trembling with rage, utterly convinced of his own power, completely unaware of the cliff he was about to step off. I met his furious gaze without flinching. I let his threat, his ultimate expression of power and arrogance, settle in the air. Then I took a small step forward. "That's an excellent question, Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice dropping to a low, conversational tone that was somehow more chilling than a shout. "You're demanding to know who has the authority to remove you from this flight, to ban you from this airline, and to accept the lawsuit you plan on filing. You want to know who you've been threatening for the last 10 minutes. I paused, letting the silence stretch. "Well, I believe the man you're looking for is me." A wave of confusion washed over Henderson's face, momentarily eclipsing his rage. The gears were turning, but they were grinding. He clearly didn't understand. He just saw a pilot, a uniform, an employee. "You?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're just the driver, a glorified bus driver with a fancier hat. You don't make decisions, you follow orders. Now go get your manager, or whoever is actually in charge, before this gets even worse for you." I allowed a small humorless smile to touch my lips. "Oh, I assure you, Mr. Henderson, it's about to get much, much worse for you. You see, you're right about one thing. The person in charge does make the decisions, and I've made one." I gestured to the two security officers who had been waiting patiently at the door. "Gentlemen, this man is being deplaned for violating federal air regulations, specifically for interference with a flight crew. He is no longer welcome on Starlight Air Flight 482. The officers stepped forward. That's when the reality of the situation finally seemed to penetrate Henderson's thick skull. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an eviction. Panic flickered in his eyes. "Wait, you can't do this," he stammered, his bravado crumbling. He started looking around at the other passengers, as if searching for an ally. "This is outrageous! Did you all see this? I'm being harassed!" No one said a word. The entire cabin was a sea of stone-faced witnesses who had heard his every shouted threat and insult. If anything, the prevailing mood was one of quiet satisfaction. The show was finally reaching its climax. One of the officers, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a calm demeanor, spoke in a polite but unyielding tone. "Sir, we need you to collect your belongings and come with us now, please." Henderson was trapped. To his left, the window. To his right, two security officers. In front of him, me. He spun back to face me, his face a contorted mask of desperation and fury. "I told you I'll sue. I'll own this airline," he repeated, the threat sounding hollow and pathetic now. "You have no idea the kind of power I wield. My law firm will strip this cheap company for parts. You'll be begging for a job flying cargo over the Arctic." "I'll take that risk," I said evenly. "But since you seem so concerned with ownership and power, allow me to properly introduce myself. My name is Captain David Evans, and when I'm not flying, I'm also David Evans, the founder, president, and majority shareholder of Starlight Air. So when you threatened to get the pilot fired, you were threatening me. When you screamed that you would sue the airline, you were threatening my company. And when you promised to buy this airline just to fire me, well, you were threatening to buy my airline from me. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. I saw one passenger in row 2 discreetly lift his phone to record. Henderson's jaw didn't just drop, it seemed to unhinge. All the color drained from his face, leaving it a pasty, mottled gray. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. The smug, powerful businessman vanished, replaced by a sputtering, utterly deflated man. You're the owner?" he whispered, the words barely audible. "I am," I confirmed. "Which means the decision to deplane you is final. The decision to refund your ticket is final. And, as of this moment, the decision to ban you for life from any and all Starlight Air flights is also final. You will never set foot on one of my planes again." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only he and the officers could hear. "You wanted to get me fired? Congratulations, you just got yourself grounded, forever." The security officers each took one of his arms. He didn't resist. He was completely limp, his body moving on autopilot as they guided him up the aisle. As he passed, his eyes met mine. They were wide with shock, humiliation, and a dawning horror. He had picked a fight with the one person he absolutely couldn't beat, and he had done it in the most public way imaginable. He collected his briefcase and coat from Clara, who pointedly avoided his gaze, and was escorted off the plane without another word. The moment he was out of sight on the jet bridge, a spontaneous round of applause broke out in the cabin. It started with a few passengers in the front and spread quickly. It was a surreal moment. People were smiling, giving me thumbs-ups. Clara looked at me, a huge smile of relief on her face. I walked back to the cockpit, feeling the adrenaline start to recede, replaced by a sense of weary satisfaction. I sat back down in the captain's chair. Mark looked at me, his expression one of pure awe. "That was legendary, Captain. Absolutely legendary." "It was necessary, Mark," I sighed, beginning my pre-flight checks for the second time. "Let's get these people to Aspen." The rest of the flight was a dream. The weather was perfect, the air was smooth, and the mood in the cabin was jubilant. When we landed in Aspen, I made a point to stand at the cabin door and thank everyone for their patience as they deplaned. Dozens of people shook my hand, patted me on the back, and told me they'd be flying Starlight for life. It was a good feeling, a reminder of why I'd started this company, to build something people could feel good about. After the last passenger left, I was helping Clara with the post-flight cabin sweep when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an email. The subject line was, "Urgent. Legal action notice." My stomach tightened. It was from the law firm of Henderson, Black & Associates. The email was short, aggressive, and full of legal jargon, but the message was clear. They were filing an immediate multi-million-dollar lawsuit for wrongful removal, defamation, and emotional distress. It seemed Mr. Henderson wasn't going down without a fight after all. My heart sank. A lawsuit, even a frivolous one, could be a nightmare for a small airline like mine. Lawyers' fees, bad press. It could be a death by 1,000 cuts. Had I miscalculated? Had I let my principles put the very company I was trying to protect in jeopardy? I scrolled to the bottom of the email, reading the signatory name. It was signed by the firm's senior managing partner, the man who was apparently about to try and destroy my life's work. The name was Eleanor Henderson, his wife. My blood ran cold. Eleanor Henderson. His wife? Of course. This wasn't just a frivolous lawsuit anymore. It was personal. This was a vendetta. I imagined them in their lavish home, Mr. Henderson nursing his bruised ego, spinning a tale of victimhood while his high-powered lawyer wife sharpened her legal knives. They were going to come at me, at Starlight Air, with everything they had. The good feeling from the flight evaporated, replaced by a knot of dread in my stomach. For the next 2 days I was a wreck. I flew my scheduled routes, but my mind was elsewhere. I consulted with my own lawyer, a sharp but pragmatic guy named Ben, who told me that while we were legally in the right, a firm like Henderson's could tie us up in court for years. They could file endless motions, bury us in discovery, and bleed us dry with legal fees, all while smearing our reputation in the press. They don't have to win the case, Dave, Ben had warned. They just have to make it too expensive for you to fight. The first official summons arrived at our small corporate office. It was a behemoth of a document, filled with accusations that painted me as a power-mad tyrant, and Mr. Henderson as a distinguished gentleman who was publicly humiliated for simply asking a question. It was pure fiction, but it was intimidating. The initial demand was for $10 million. I felt sick. The story, however, had another life I hadn't anticipated. The passenger in row 2, the one who had been recording on his phone, was a travel blogger with a decent following. He'd posted the entire video, not just the part with me revealing who I was, but the whole ugly tirade from Henderson. He'd titled it, CEO Pilot Shuts Down, Entitled Passenger from Hell. The video went viral. By the time we landed back in Denver after a flight from Salt Lake City, it had over 1 million views. The next morning, 5 million. It was everywhere. News outlets picked it up. My face was on the morning news. The audio of Henderson screaming about owning my rust bucket airline and calling my flight attendant a simpleton became a meme. The comments section was a tidal wave of support for me and Starlight Air. People shared their own horror stories of entitled passengers. Pilots from other airlines hailed me as a hero. Bookings on our website surged by over 300%. We were the airline that fought back. My phone started ringing off the hook, but it wasn't just news reporters. It was other business owners, CEOs of small companies who had dealt with their own versions of Mr. Henderson. They offered support, advice, and solidarity. It was overwhelming. I had stood up for my crew and my company, and it turned out I had stood up for a lot of other people too. On the third day, Ben called me. "You are not going to believe this," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I just got off the phone with Eleanor Henderson." My heart pounded. "And?" "She wants to meet. Just you, her, and me. No other lawyers. Says she wants to discuss a settlement." "A settlement? What's her angle?" I asked, suspicious. "I don't know," Ben admitted, "but she sounded different, not aggressive, almost conciliatory. We meet at her office tomorrow at 10 a.m. The next morning, I walked into the opulent downtown offices of Henderson Black & Associates feeling like I was entering the lion's den. Ben and I were shown into a vast corner office with a floor-to-ceiling view of the city. A woman stood with her back to us, looking out the window. She was tall, impeccably dressed, and radiated an aura of intimidating competence. When she turned, I was surprised. She looked exhausted. The confident legal shark I expected was nowhere to be seen. "Captain Evans," she said, her voice quiet and strained. "Thank you for coming. I am Eleanor Henderson." "Ma'am," I said, nodding curtly. "Please sit." She gestured to the leather chairs opposite her massive mahogany desk. "I will get straight to the point. I am here to formally withdraw the lawsuit against you and Starlight Air." Ben and I exchanged a stunned glance. I opened my mouth to speak, but she held up a hand. "And I am here," she continued, her voice trembling slightly, "to offer my most profound and sincere apology for my husband's behavior, and for my own." She sat down, her professional mask crumbling. "I saw the video, Captain, the full video. I saw what he said to your flight attendant. I heard the threats he made to you. For years I've enabled that behavior. I've cleaned up his messes, soothed the egos he's bruised. I told myself it was just bluster, that it was his way of dealing with stress. But seeing it like that, through the eyes of the public, I was mortified. I was disgusted." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a genuine shame that I never expected. "When he came home that night, he told me a story about an abusive pilot on a power trip. I believed him. I filed the suit because I thought I was defending my husband. I was wrong. I was defending a bully." She pushed a document across the desk toward Ben. "This is the notice of withdrawal. It's already been filed with the court. It's over." She then slid a personal check across the desk toward me. "And this is to cover Mr. Benjamin's fees, and as a donation to a charity of your choice. A small token of my deep regret for the trouble we've caused you." I stared at her, speechless. This was the last thing I had expected. All the fight went out of me, replaced by a strange sense of pity. "He's my husband," she finished, her voice barely a whisper. but he is no longer a partner at this firm, and he is currently enrolled in a rather intensive anger management program. It seems his lifetime ban extends to more than just your airline. I looked at Ben, who gave a slight nod. I pushed the check back across the desk. That won't be necessary, Mrs. Henderson. Your apology is more than enough. Just treat people with kindness. That's all I've ever asked. She looked up, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, and nodded. Thank you, Captain. Walking out of that building and into the bright sunlight, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. We hadn't just won. We had been vindicated. Back at the airport, I walked straight onto the Embraer that had started it all. Clara was there, preparing for the afternoon flight to Telluride. I told her everything. Her smile lit up the entire cabin. As I settled into the captain's seat and started my pre-flight check, the familiar hum of the APU felt different. It was the sound of a battle won, of a principle upheld. Starlight Air was more than just an airline. It was a promise that decency and respect weren't just good policy. They were good business. I looked out at the endless blue sky, took the controls and pushed the throttles forward. It was time to fly.